Welcome to The Being Leader. I'm Annabelle Graham. Welcome to this episode of The Being Leader, the podcast that discusses how we need to show up and be as leaders, reflecting on what impacts our behaviours, our relationships and our outcomes, and allows us to focus more on our approach to leading ourselves, our teams and our organisations. Today, I'm joined by Giorgia Prestento. Giorgia is a decision-making advisor, a behavioural scientist and a change management consultant who works with organisations who want to optimise their decision-making in order to achieve more successful outcomes. Giorgia, welcome. It's a pleasure to have you on The Being Leader.
Hi, thank you for inviting me, Annabelle.
Now, I always like the listeners to hear a little bit more about what led guests to where they are now. So it would be great if you can just sort of give me a bit of background about how did you end up specialising in what you do?
Yeah, I guess I've always been fascinated by people, observing people. Since I was a kid, I think I was a bit of a shy kid. So I was just looking around, observing people, what they do, what they say. And that's, it started that way, I think, just observing and, wanting to understand a little bit more. So I think that was one of my big themes. The other one is just fixing things. I have like this kind of antennas for like low tolerance of things not working properly. Bureaucratic things or inefficiency, bad customer service. I just don't like it. And I think when I just start bringing those things together, I think that just brought me to, after a few steps to the career that I had. So my first job was in procurement. I did some product management. And then I ended up, when I was in British Telecom, my first employer, working in business improvement. That essentially was change management. And that's the first time really I could bring those two things together, people, behaviors, how they do things.
And fix stuff.
Yeah, and just fix them. And, and I've done anything like optimizing and that process re-engineering, designing scripts, strategy, reorganization, all of those things, I did it first as an employee, I worked as a consultant, then, independently. And also the other thing, perhaps, is it's not just like fixing things. I don't like to put it in that category, but when I started managing people, it became very much to working with people and helping them fulfill their potential. When I started managing people, coaching people, that becomes something that I still am, of course, really passionate about. How can you actually run organizations in a way that actually is good for the employees and the customers, as well as, as the bottom line. And on the change as well. So I've been working lots of international projects, different industries, different companies. So, you accumulate all of that, experience and expertise over time and, more people to observe. And then a few years ago, I did a master's in behavioural science at the London School of Economics. And that was really good to, understand, the theory, the academic side. And, bringing those things together. And I guess that's where I am here today. And then sort of, my why really has become, how do I inspire people to take an alternative perspective? And what I'm doing it now is via optimizing decision making.
There's lots of bits in there that sort of got me thinking around that fixing, that moving with change, that observing around behavior and thinking about how taking that alternative perspective. So before we get into that a little bit more, can you explain an idiot's guide for me and for others listening who are going, what's this behavioural science witchcraft? Explain to me a little bit more about what that is and why it's useful.
What it is a relatively new discipline, and the way they explain it is just a mixture. So you have like a big pot, you put economics, you put psychology, sprinkle of neuroscience, a sprinkle of anthropology, and that's pretty much what it is. And I did my first degree in economics, and it's all about rational people maximizing profit. We just, everything that we do, there is a reason, and there is so much of our cognitive side in there. But essentially, people that are a bit irrational. We don't do things because we have to. We're also a bit like lazy as well. We do the easy thing.
We shortcut.
Yeah. And it's normal, because if we had to think deeply about every single decision, we never got out of bed.
Yeah, it's draining.
And, yeah, it is. And, the brain as well uses a lot of, energy. So behavioral science is very much, it looks like people for real, this is what they do. And I think is, people that haven't come across it that much, that there are two great books and writers. So one of them is Thinking Fast and Slow. So there was Daniel Kahneman that also won the Nobel Prize in 2002, which I thought it was really cool. So it was a psychologist that won the economics prize.
Yeah.
Which I thought that's really nice. And the other, all the nudge theory. So I think, we heard about the nudge theory, Richard Thaler, again, another Nobel in 2017. And I think, all those prizes, they're also good to understand, it's not like traditional economics, but it's just a different way of looking at the world, which is more about, this is what people do in reality.
And you said it mixes a bit of psychology, a bit of neuroscience, a bit of sociology, and a bit of anthropology. So is it looking at patterns and understanding the patterns that people go through from a behavior point of view?
Yeah, in a way, you can call it patterns as well. So, we have a certain way of behaving, and, we create habits, over time. For example, we tend, we have rules of thumbs, heuristics. So if you don't know an answer, you tend to look at what's the most similar option. Or, there are things, for example, there was Kahneman's prospect theory, which is, loss aversion. We just don't want to lose. We rather not gain something than lose something that we have, even if it's not important for us. Those are all things that, in a way, is patterns of, of behavior, of, how we deal with things. And the other one probably is, the way that our brain works. Still a lot of it is driven by the subconscious, our primitive brain. Our wanting to, we are part of a society, we don't want to upset people, so sometimes we take decisions for that reason. We go with the flow because we just don't want to stand out, because, in the caveman period, if you stand out too much, they abandon you. So there's a lot of those things that actually you can observe, and especially in groups, in group decisions, you have all of that, behaviors going on, and that's why I just find all the decision-making groups really fascinated, and it became what I'm doing as it's my main job.
Fantastic. So thinking about that decision in groups, because groups are, if you think about how we work from a team point of view, that's how we spend most of our time. Very rarely do we have the ability to make decisions on our own entirely without any input from anyone else. We don't work in isolation. So what impact does that have then on how we make decisions and how we work in group environment?
This is quite interesting. It was the topic of my master thesis, all the behavioral influences of, groups when taking decisions. And I think a lot of it is about the behaviors that I hinted at already. So there is a lot of social pressure, and we just feel it. And, sometimes we don't want to express an opinion just in case, what will other people think about me? So that stops a lot of people sharing information or giving an opinion, or just saying something that it may be against the, the rest of the group. one of the interesting findings that I found is what they call low information. So people don't share information in a group. And it's not because of this thing that we say, oh, information is power. If I give it to other people, then, I don't have it anymore. But it's because we are worried of what other people will think. And also, if we believe that information is unique, nobody else thinks that, we may think, oh, it's wrong or it's not valuable. So there's a lot of dynamics that happen in the group that actually stops, people expressing their opinion. And there's lots of interesting experiments in general in groups. So you could have, and people literally, if all the peers, they say, oh, this sofa is blue, even if it's red, they'll just say, oh, it must be blue, because like 50 people say that. Or you're out to dinner, everybody says, oh, this wine is amazing, and you don't like it, but you're not going to say, oh, I really don't like this one, And that, if you have that in a group consistently in an organization, you end up with, less valuable information than you should have. So, and that's all the social pressure. There's also something else, a cascade effect. So if you have a group of people and the first person agrees, then, and the second one does as well, then you have this cascade effect, and it will become increasingly difficult for people to state a different opinion. And these are all subconscious things that are happening in the group. So nobody's going to say, oh, I'm voting in favor just because the other two people did. You just automatically do it.
And that, especially if it's, I'm thinking about, if you're in a team and you've got 2 or 3 really senior players, it could be the team manager, could be another couple who are, if we've got that hierarchy in there as well, then that's going to have a real impact from a dominance point of view, because not only have we got a status threat, I don't want to speak out to you because you're a higher status than me, therefore that might impact me, but actually also I don't want to look daft among my peers, and everyone else has said yes, so I must be wrong.
Yeah, and this is a minefield. And also it happens, as you said, often to people that are introverted. They don't feel like speaking up, or junior people, specialists that, they just know so much of their subject, but, and sometimes they are, the subject is so complex that people just say, oh, I just don't understand it. And, that stops that conversation.
Yeah, and I'm thinking about conversations I've had with people where they've said, I wasn't sure if I had an opinion on it, therefore I'm just not going to say anything.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And then,
of course you have, biases. We all have biases. And, if you have a group with, everything that we discussed already, few biases, not enough diversity, then you're just thinking, okay, so you start, really realizing that, the dynamics, they're not conducive to collaboration and taking decisions that they're good for the company and for, the whole group.
And I'm assuming when you say diversity that we're not talking about it in that classic sense that we see from an HR point of view. We're talking it in its true sense of diversity of opinion and thought. So either we haven't got enough voices in the game saying, this is what I think, and creating that debate. Or, and I know this is something I've seen in organizations, that we don't have enough newness in some way or difference in experiences that people have had. So what I mean by that is where we've maybe got organizations where the key players in a team have been in that business for 5, 10, sometimes longer years. They only know what they know, and their knowledge of that big wide world outside is non-existent. Therefore, we sort of think in like a rut, but it's an unknowing rut.
Yeah, and they, absolutely, they think there's nothing else beyond that, and that's why you just need absolutely diversity of ideas or experience, education, I mean, you still have some companies that they say, oh, we must recruit from top universities. And you think, okay,
Brilliant. Recruit the same people then.
I know.
I think that's beginning to break out a little bit now, but you're right. There is still that sort of, it is a bias.
Mm-hmm.
It's this thought process that we can, if we go to there, we're going to get what we're looking for, but we are just going to get the same thing. So why is behavioral science useful to organizations? How can it help them?
I think it's just because everything we discussed. I mean, traditionally, it's what I call traditional change. So in the past, you just thought, oh, that's a problem, let's go and fix it. And, sometimes you just fix it in a very generic way without understanding, the behaviors of people or what drives, that behaviors, for example. Well, what the behavioral science and behavioral change does, so just say, okay, let's understand, why people do things in a certain way. And then is there anything that we can do to actually change it? I mean, I had, a client, for example, that had this thing, we need to empower people managers, which essentially sort of means, let them do the managing thing, just, the how, engage with people, motivate, rather than just going around and say, have you done your 5 actions? But ask them, what was it like? What have you learned? So, that was the problem that we're facing it. And I guess, knowing traditionally would be, okay, let's run a training program. Let's prepare some slides, some scripts, some instructions. And I've seen it, and that doesn't work. So what I've done, I started looking, okay, what's behind it? What are the reasons that, people managers don't act in a certain way? And it could be about insecurity, self-confidence, fear of the consequences. If they do it wrong, they don't know how to do it. And some of them, they never thought of, it was important. So based on the reasons for those behaviors, then you just start looking, okay, these are the interventions that we can do behaviorally. It could be things like, how do we make it easy for them? Just using defaults, using incentives. So if managers, for example, in that case, we started looking, okay, how do we incentivize them and change their behaviors by prioritizing the managing part of the role rather than, for example, getting, projects done on time. Social norms as well, which is something that I'm really interested around, behavioral science. We tend to follow what other people around us do. So if you just manage to pick up some key influencers, people around the company that actually they're easily demonstrate those behaviors, promote them, showcase them. And then other people will follow, because that becomes, this is the kind of company that we are. This is the kind of behaviors that, we promote, using the right messengers as well. You've seen a lot of, programs that they fell flat because the messenger, the person promoting the change, it was not trusted. It was not respected. It was just not the right people that were not listening to this person as much as they would have somebody else. So these are all the things and elements, and I could talk about probably a whole day about it. That behavioral change, looks at. And that's why for me it's much more effective than really, some of the things that we used to do in the past.
So I think I really like, there's a couple of things that you mentioned there. So that one about getting it really good advocates for change. And I remember doing that years ago. I used to have a region when I had a proper job and I worked in retail. I used to have one manager within my region of, I think I had about 18 stores at that point. And they were the ones that I knew, if I got them on board, if I sold it into her first, because A, everyone loved her, and B, she was super positive and always liked to try new things. If I could test it there, get her on board, then actually she'd do all my selling for me.
Yeah.
in some ways she'd do that. So that importance of advocates, but also the role modeling. So that learning by seeing other people doing it. And I love the fact that you said it's made me think actually for programs, have we got the right role models? Because actually, if that person leading it or selling it isn't role modeling those behaviors, as you and I know, we'll go into organizations and you may at a middle level stick a development intervention in with, a population of managers or leaders. But if the people above aren't doing it, they very quickly get disillusioned because they're not seeing it.
And just research. So the other thing that I do, I just co-founded this networking event called Thank Goodness It's Monday. So we had a session on ethics.
Love it.
And this is like really important in there, because we always, there's always like the bad guy, the bad apple. But essentially that person behaves in a certain way because everybody around does. And it just had, all the famous cases, you can reconduct to that. So if you're a new joiner in the company and your manager, your peers, they steal pencils, you'll just say, oh, it's okay to just, pick up the stationery from the cupboard. Or, and then you end up, feeling expenses of embezzling fund. But, all of those things. So nobody that joins the company would do it thinking, oh, I'm just going to be a bad guy. It just sort of you behave. And again, it goes back to the social norms, the context, like the people around you.
Yeah, I completely agree. I've lost count the amount of times I've said that to people where I've said, look, you haven't made a bad decision when you've hired somebody. You probably made the right decision. You hired the right person. People don't start jobs to do a shit job.
Yeah.
We've got to look at what happened when they came in all bouncy and fresh-faced and excited to where they are now, and what was the bit in the middle that went wrong, because that's our responsibility.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Or the team's responsibility, but there's something that's gone wrong in the middle that's causing an issue. So when you're thinking about the organizations and the teams that you work with, what type of issues do you see, especially around that decision-making thing? What type of problems come up?
Yeah. I mean, it always starts, every assignment, I always like to just sort of, to me, it's about understanding, the organization. And you just start having a dialogue and conversation, and things that come up, they are, oh, it takes too long to take decisions, or it costs a lot of money because, we just sort of, for that reason, or, the meetings, they are just, my team, the meetings take too long, there's just no structure, it's negative dynamics, it's big dysfunctional. So it started with all those things, and then as you do in coaching, you just sort of dig in till you just find out, a couple of things that, you just, you want to, to look at. For example, there was this company that were just preparing, the business cases, the annual planning, all of that. And it was a smaller company, part of, a larger corporate. Based somewhere else. And one of the things that I noticed, it was that it was taking them, because it was quite small, it was, everybody had a different opinion of the process. So after the third person that I spoke with, everybody, was drawing the process, and it looked different every time. So I thought, okay, that's interesting. And this is just, the way they were operating. So the decision was taking a long time because the mindset, it was a startup. And actually, they just needed to bring, process, some structure, some governance around it. So you could say it was taking too long, but, the real root cause is that, there was a missing thing in how they were organized as a governance. And then from there, so I just started using, so I have this framework, which has got like 3 elements around decisions. So one of them is around information. So we need to have, useful information, which is, relevant and accurate. And, we have so much data that actually that's more difficult than it looks like to actually distill all the information till we have that, because a decision is based on the information that you have. And generally decisions is all about reducing uncertainty. The second one, as I mentioned, is around the governance. Do we have a process? Do we have a way of taking decisions? Just working with clients where, they just don't have a means or a tools or techniques to take the decisions in a group. They meet and they'll just see what happens. And the third one, as we already talked about, is everything around the group dynamics. So I sort of always start using, these three elements in the framework, and then just see, which ones, for example, we should focus on or start with.
Yeah. So which bit's out of alignment? Is it the fact that we haven't got enough information? Is it the fact that there's no governance and process in place, or no structure, or everyone has a different structure?
Yeah.
Or is it actually we've got a dynamic issue that we need to deal with?
Yeah.
Nice.
And sometimes it's bits of everything, but there's always one that you need to start from somewhere.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And genuinely and generally, if everyone's getting along and everyone's having a say, then the dynamic thing is probably less of the issue. We'll look at more of the others. When you said, people had a different process after you'd asked 3 or 4 people, it reminded me of, have you come across Tom Wojcik?
No.
Okay. I thought you would have done. So Tom Wojcik is an American guy. He's a systems theorist around process mapping and how to map systems. And there's a great TED talk called How to Make Toast. And the whole piece around how to make toast is, if you ask a room full of people, can you draw the process for how to make toast? You will get all manner of different versions.
Yeah.
From one starting with Tesco's loaf of bread and toaster, and somebody else showing the wheat in the field being grown to be able to make the bread, and it goes on forever. So it's a really nice intro activity for people to have a think around, how do you go about doing this? But it then links into getting people in groups to do exactly the same thing with the process that they're doing, and then narrow down that until they get root causes that they need.
Yeah, and it doesn't have to be cumbersome. So I know when you start talking with people, you just use the word structure, a process, they go, oh my God, this is just too much. But to me, it's as simple as, do we have a good agenda? Have we formulated the decision question? Actually, what is the decision that we need to take? Which is not always, straightforward. And you can just describe a question for a decision in lots of different ways. But also, the meeting flow. So one of the, intervention, for example, it would be, do people talk in turns? Do we vote anonymously? Do we have presentation by experts? Which information we need? So if you have all of those things in place and the group is used to work in a certain way, actually you get there ready. As opposed to getting a meeting and sometimes spending 1 hour just deciding how to decide, and then you have to meet again. And this is, to me, that's what I call structure, which is, having those things in place actually allows you to have the ideas and just to be much more creative. Then actually you have to start, as they say, inventing the wheel every time.
So if you think about the teams or the organizations that you've worked with, how many people do actually have a decision-making structure in place?
Not that many. I actually have a survey out asking, some of, those questions as well. And, it's, I had a few responses, not like thousands of them, but the initial ones, not that much. And to me, I just see, it's become my mission to bring, confident decision making, because I think it's going to make it easy for everybody.
Yeah, and I'm smiling as you're saying that, because I'm thinking of the teams and organizations I work with, and I'm thinking nobody has that in place at all. In fact, they're so. It's not that they won't make decisions, but they then don't take the actions. So they don't follow up on the actions, so nothing ends up getting done. So what we don't do at the end, so we don't agree outcomes. We cram 45 things onto an agenda in an hour and think for some ridiculous idea that we're going to actually get it done,
Yeah.
when actually we probably need to talk about two. And then we don't recap on the actions at the end, so nobody follows up. Madness.
Yeah, I know. And then a couple of weeks afterwards, you start again. And that's what, I mean, one of the services that I developed is around facilitating those meetings. Literally just take the burden, from, in a good way, from the group. Just say, okay, I'll organize it. I'll look about the people attending, the agenda. I create a structure, what I call like the decision space, based on the needs of the group and the decision, what kind of voting, how do we present the information, or how do we do it that? And then, of course, absolutely, what do we do with the decision? We need to capture it somehow, and, somebody needs to do something about it.
So as you were talking there was a couple of things coming up for me. I bet that I know I see within some clients. And I've definitely seen, when I've been part of teams. One is around the need to get to a consensus. And the other is around coming back to a decision. So revisiting it after, say, a period of time. So when you think it's done and dusted, it ends up being pulled back up again.
Yeah.
So what is it that causes those?
Well, if we start with the need for the consensus, I think it goes back to what we talk about. We are social creatures. We just want to belong to a group. So reaching consensus is, it comes naturally, something that we strive for. And sometimes, because on a lot of programs and strategy, you have the need for having a united front. That's another reason why, there is that, I think that drive. So, and I think revisiting as well, I think it goes back to that governance. So if you don't have, the confidence and the understanding of what is important in a decision, you just go back to it. I've seen in some groups, and I think, you have as well, where it is not clear who the ultimate decision maker is. There is always one. But if a group is very consensual, they just want everybody to be happy and so-called collaborative, it's very difficult for that person to just say, okay, it's me, the buck stops with me, and this is the decision. Mm-hmm. And these are some of the behaviors they go on in there.
Yeah, I can definitely recognize that. I know for some teams that we're in, there's that not wanting to make a decision, or the leader not actually being the person with the power. Mm-hmm. So therefore, they might say, let's do it, but in some ways they're waiting for and it might be the number two, or it might just be the one who's got the popular vote. We're waiting for them to say yes, and if they don't say yes, then we don't know where to go, so therefore we go back on the decision because we aren't sure whether they're happy or not, and that's the bit that's going to get the group to go.
Yeah, because you have a group of people and there's so much going on in their conscious and subconscious, all those different things going on, and that's what sort of creates this, sometimes good decisions and sometimes the difficulty.
And you wonder how on earth we actually get anything done with all of that going on
as well. I think it's amazing that we do, but I think the potential to do it better, to fixing it, I think is there.
Absolutely. So if you are going into an organization, you said, the key things that you tend to look at is, have they got the right useful information? Is there a process or governance in place, and how are the group dynamics? What else would you look at?
I think it's just those three, and everything else is I think it's the same for you. We've just been working with so many different people. You have some kind of intuition. Mm-hmm. so that you pick up the vibes, you get a sense of how the company works.
Mm-hmm.
And you sort of use, I tend to use that insight to actually, speed up in a way, how I work. That's part of my data gathering as well. Mm-hmm. Oh, and of course, I just like data. To me, it's just about measuring, how they do things. So the initial to me is just the intuition. You get a sense of the company, and then you're just thinking, okay, how can I measure things? And it could be, speed of decisions, or you just do some kind of, questions or one-to-one coaching session with the decision makers. I'm a big fan of observation. It's a bit difficult at the moment, but there's nothing like sort of seeing, how people interact, with each other, or actually seeing where does the information come from? What do people talk about? What's the language? What's the narrative? So these are all things that enable you to understand more, the context, of the change.
And you said, it's pretty difficult at the moment to observe people. Well, getting in a room's not going to be the best thing, not going to be the easiest thing, it's got to be said, bearing in mind that we're in varying degrees of tiers and lockdowns. But have you seen a change in behaviour around that decision-making piece because of the move to virtual working, which we've all done this year?
I think what I've seen probably is more some kind of reluctance to taking decisions. I think a little bit more just because we have little information. So in general we are in the situation this year which we've not had before. So, and generally we take information based on data, historic data. Is about a production, or do we have orders in place, what our customers are doing. So all of those things that companies would had a view of what's going to happen within a week, a month, 1 year. So some of those things, just because we don't know literally what's going to happen tomorrow, are we allowed to go out to the shops? And I think all of that makes decisions more difficult. It increases the uncertainty. I just wrote, just 1 or 2 weeks ago, an article which was all around how, I believe uncertainty has changed. Whereby uncertainty of a decision used to reside in the long term. We didn't know what was going to happen in 1 year or 5 years' time. Now the uncertainty is much stronger in the present. And either like optimism bias or hopefulness, we think that in 1 year's time, it will be okay, but we're not sure. And the difficult decisions, they are about the present.
Yeah, and I get that, because I think that it's interesting about that reluctance because of certainty. And I know, and I suppose it's probably true now, I know in the past, I've worked with lots of teams through restructures, and there's always been that case of we can't plan, we don't know, what do we do? And this paralysis sits in, where people don't do anything because they're not sure what they can do. And I know I've always said to them, make the time scale shorter. The shorter your time scale, even if you're planning a week out, or 2 weeks out, or a month out, you probably can see that. And that then increases the certainty because we've got better line of sight. So in some cases, I suppose it's saying to people, okay, you probably can't plan in 3 months' time. So you therefore have to make one of two choices. Either make it short term, knowing that you're just going to have to make a lot more, or make one for 3-6 months' time, or whatever it may be, perfectly happy and prepared to know that you're going to have to change your mind. Mm-hmm. And I think people really struggle with changing their minds after they've made decisions.
Yeah.
Because they've got new info. Because we make the decision with the best info we've got at the point at which we make it.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's the thing around decision. I was just leaving it till the end as my closing remark, but it's about the process, not the outcome. We can't control the outcome. There are just so many different factors at play. The only thing we can control is the process. Even in simple things. Let's say you want to buy a new TV. The process is you do the research, you read the reviews, you ask your friend who knows everything, and then you just buy it. If in 6 months' time, like this amazing new model comes out, there's nothing you can do about it. Your decision was based on the information you had at the time. And by doing that, you actually decreases some of the pressure. You don't have regret because actually you just say, yeah, I follow all the steps. It's not like you go in a shop and you just say, yeah, I want that one in the corner. You actually do your research, and that helps.
And it's also being quite comfortable to go, right, I've made the decision now. If it changes in a month, that's fine. We'll change the decision. We'll change, we'll change what we're going to do. But we've got to do something now.
Yeah, and it's that flexibility, and just people absolutely that they're feared of changing their mind, and not just say, oh, we decided 6 months ago we must do it that way. Just no, you just, it's okay. And also, not taking a decision is a decision.
Yes. And sometimes it's the right one.
Yeah, just say, yes, wait. Yeah, I'll just go back in and put a time. Just say, in 1 month's time, let's go back to it, and that's okay.
Yeah, it's that piece around choice. People struggle with it.
Yeah, and okay, that was one of my other tips. Sometimes we have too much choice. And I think we just struggle with decisions because you have, go back to the TV, you get like so many. You just go to a supermarket, shelves, full of products. So having too much choice, they can become overwhelming. So one of the things is around, okay, how do I simplify? How do I remove some of that? There's just a fun quote. It was from Barack Obama, and he said, I only have 2 suits, a gray and a blue. I have so many big decisions to take that I just need to remove, some of those, what I eat, what I wear. It'll just make it easy. Yeah. I'll say, one of the things I don't like, restaurants with huge menus. And you just think, oh, there's just so much. So I'll just say, okay, let's keep it to 5 things, cook them well, because it's much easier to cook 5 things well than, 50. And that makes it easy, for the consumers, for the users, and for them as well.
Yeah, it's why I usually, for sometimes months, if not years on end up having the same breakfast every morning, because I can't cope with that choice. Dinner and lunch are different most days, but breakfast, you know what, first thing in the morning, cannot be bothered with different options. Just, get up, same thing, eat.
I know, same here.
That's all you need. But I think we all do it. And it's that when you look at, when I'm working, especially with coaching clients, I find looking at habit formation really interesting and how you create habits. And I send them off to Gretchen Rubin's site quite frequently and get them to look at the habit formation for what their tendencies are and what makes them do it. But actually, I remember getting a few clients to track their habits and to track, what they did. And they said, I remember one person going, I gave up by about 5 o'clock on day 1 because I realized quite how boring I was, because everything was exactly the same. I had the same breakfast, I had the same lunch, I put the same things on, I did this. He said, my routines were ridiculous. But that's about, just decreasing the amount of decisions that we have to make.
And especially at the moment, I think we all realize this here, that it can be quite, the whole environment can be quite taxing. And, chunking it up, looking at your priorities, reducing options, they're all things that they just do as well in terms of, our mind and our emotions and our spirit, however you want to call it.
Absolutely. So as some parting tips, we've got your lovely 3-step framework for people to think around from an organizational point of view. But if we were thinking about, whether it to be the individual or to a team, if there were 3 key things that you would recommend to them to help make better decisions.
Yeah, well, you already stole 2 of them. So one of them was going to be the process, not to the outcome, sort of look at it that way. And also, don't be overwhelmed. You just, don't worry too much. It can be difficult to take decisions, and that could be our personal decisions, or it could be a CEO having to take, a lot of, tough ones under pressure. Also would say self-awareness, understanding, and I have some, clients that I coach around decisions. What is your decision style? How do you work within a group? How do you relate to other people when you're taking a decision? What are your biases? Do you use intuition? Do you just sort of like to look at data, in what proportion? So, raising that level of awareness is very useful. And the other one, probably, is a huge subject, so that would be another tool, but it's all around the intuition. Which is absolutely fascinating subject. So, and I think it's important to practice your intuition as well. Picking up those cues in the environment that help you take the decisions. And it works for, some topics. For example, I've been working with lots of different companies. As I said before, I go to a new client and I get the vibes. There are some things I don't have any intuition whatsoever. I have to choose like a pension. I got no idea. All those things that, depends what's important to you. You actually grow that level of understanding. You pick up the cues from the environment. You just learn from what happens. So that's another kind of important as well. But I say it's another subject, quite complex.
So it's thinking about, where do I use my intuition?
Yeah.
Understanding my process.
Yeah. That awareness.
Or having a process.
Yeah.
And not worrying too much or being overwhelmed. So shortening the process or delaying the process depending on the decision, depending on what it is. Fabulous. So hopefully now that will mean we go away being decision-making machines. Either that or neurotic, because we've sat and analysed it to such an extent.
I know. I don't like to think about machine. There's a lot of talk around AI and machine decisions and all of that. I rather have, a little bit quirky, irrational human being taking the decision.
Well, I think we're all right. I think we've got a fair few of those still kicking around at the moment. So
yeah, I know they're good with all the biases and the whole that challenges.
It would become far too predictable if we were just trying to assess what machines were doing all the time, and we didn't have the fun of people watching into the process.
They have their uses. There are instances where they're just they're better at it still. But I think we still have to take so many decisions, every day. And to me, it's just about, taking more confident decisions. Mm-hmm. That's it. We can't do anything else. Reduce uncertainty, become more confident in what we do.
Fabulous. Well, look, Giorgia, thank you. It's been an absolute pleasure to explore decision-making and all of the different aspects of it, which I don't think I'd ever quite recognised before. So thank you for joining me today.
I know, thank you so much for inviting me.
Thank you for joining us on this episode of The Being Leader. If you enjoyed this and found it useful, then please share it with your teams or a friend or colleague who may find it useful too. We can only grow our listenership by you telling more people about it. And thank you to those of you who have listened into the episode so far. Thanks for listening to The Being Leader.